The beeswax candles in St. Ren's Cathedral had been burning since 6 in the morning. By 2:47 in the afternoon, the accumulated heat of 200 small flames had done nothing to warm the stone. October in South Boston had its own theology, cold as penance, gray as confession, the kind of weather that made even the faithful wonder if they were being tested. Cara Donovan stood in the vestibule and let her maid of honor adjust her veil for the third time. "You're shaking," Nina whispered. "I'm cold." "You're allowed to be nervous." Cara said nothing. Nervous was the wrong word. Nervous implied uncertainty. What she felt was closer to the stillness before a controlled demolition. Every charge placed, every calculation complete, nothing left but the waiting. 8 months of preparation, 8 months of dress fittings and seating charts, and learning to smile at Marcus Callahan, across restaurant tables while something inside her chest went slowly numb. 8 months of telling herself this was the right choice. The only choice. Her brother owed the Callahan organization $340,000. Gambling debts layered over protection money, layered over interest compounded, with the particular cruelty that men like Marcus called business. Sean was 24 years old and stupid in the way that young men with dead fathers in too much grief often became stupid. He had walked into a debt he could never walk out of, so Cara walked in instead. She had made peace with it. Almost. The organ began. A Bach prelude she had chosen because it was beautiful and because Marcus hadn't cared enough to have an opinion. She watched the doors to the nave swing open, watched the congregation rise in a collective rustle of wool and silk, and she thought, this is what survival looks like. This is what you do for the people you love. She stepped forward, the center aisle of St. Brendan's stretched before her like a throat. 160 people filled the pews. Half of them family or friends of family, the other half men whose suits fit a particular way, whose eyes moved with a particular attentiveness. Cara had learned to read rooms since she was 16 years old, tending bar in her father's pub while men conducted conversations they thought she was too young to understand. She understood everything. She always had. The stained glass threw fractured light across the white floral arrangements. St. Patrick in cobalt and gold, the Virgin in rose and cream. The pale autumn sun fought through the windows and lost, leaving the nave suspended in a perpetual dusk that the candles couldn't quite defeat. She smelled incense, old wood. The particular cologne Marcus wore, something French and architectural, designed to communicate wealth rather than warmth. He stood at the altar in a charcoal suit that cost more than her father's pub had made in its final month of operation. Silver temples, squared shoulders, the smile he deployed like a press release, photographically perfect, structurally sound, absolutely empty of anything resembling genuine feeling. Cara had learned to stop looking for warmth in that smile. It was easier that way. She reached the altar. The organ faded. The priest, Father Donnelly, who had baptized her, who had buried her father, who had no idea what he was actually blessing today, opened his book and began to speak. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God." Cara's hands were steady around her bouquet, white ranunculus, baby's breath, stems wrapped in ivory silk. She had chosen them because they were simple, and because they would photograph well, and because she had stopped caring about flowers approximately 6 months ago. She was thinking about load tolerances, about stress fractures, about the particular mathematics of sacrifice, what you give, what you get, whether the equation ever actually balances. She was thinking about none of this when the side door opened. The sound was small, hinges that needed oil, a whisper of outside air cutting through the accumulated warmth of 200 candles. Cara would not have noticed it at all except for what happened next. Marcus's best man, a thick-necked man named Connolly who Cara had never seen, went completely rigid. Then the 2 men stationed near the side exits, the ones who had been pretending to be ushers, stopped pretending. Then Marcus's smile did something Cara had never seen it do before. It collapsed. Not quickly, slowly, deliberately, like a building being lowered rather than dropped. And something else moved into place behind his eyes. Something that looked almost like anticipation. Cara turned. He stood in the side doorway with one hand in his pocket and the other resting against the door frame. The light from the stained glass caught the edge of his jaw, the line of his shoulders, the particular stillness that she had 7 years trying to forget. Dante Reyes, dead for 7 years, buried in her memory alongside her father and her mother, and every other thing she had lost and learned to keep losing. The man she had loved at 20 years old with the particular ferocity of someone who didn't yet know that love could be a thing that got taken from you. He didn't look dead. He looked like a man who had been sharpened by something, leaner than she remembered. A scar along his jaw she didn't recognize. The same dark eyes, the same impossible stillness, but weathered now, like wood left out in salt air, like stone shaped by decades of water. He didn't move past the threshold. He simply stood there, taking in the room with a gaze that calculated everything it touched. The congregation, the exits, the men whose hands had moved subtly toward their jacket interiors. Marcus at the altar, watching him with that strange anticipatory brightness. And then, deliberately last, his eyes found Kara. She stopped breathing. 7 years of grief. 7 years of learning to build a life around the shape of his absence. 7 years of telling herself she was over it, she had moved on. She was a different person now. All of it dissolved in the 3 seconds it took for Dante Reyes to look at her across a cathedral full of armed men and say absolutely nothing. He didn't have to speak. His presence was the message. His return was the detonation. Kara became aware, distantly, that the congregation was murmuring, that Father Donnelly had stopped mid-sentence, that the entire architecture of the afternoon had shifted around a single impossible fact. Dante Reyes was alive, and he had walked into her wedding. The murmuring died. The silence that replaced it was the particular silence of predators assessing a situation, calculating odds, measuring distances, waiting for a signal. Marcus provided it. He reached inside his jacket. Kara's breath caught, but it wasn't a weapon. It was a phone. He looked at the screen, pressed a single button, and spoke 2 words she couldn't hear. Then he ended the call. Then he looked at Dante, and smiled. Not the press release smile, something older, something genuine in the way that cruelty could be genuine. The smile of a man watching a trap close. Kara looked at Dante, looked at Marcus, looked at the men near the exits who were no longer pretending to be anything other than what they were, and understood. This was never her wedding. This was never about settling her brother's debt. This was bait. She was standing in a cathedral full of Marcus Callahan's men, wearing a white dress, with nowhere to run, and the man she had loved 7 years ago had just walked directly into the center of everything. The silence in St. Brendan's Cathedral lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Marcus Callahan raised his hand, a small gesture, almost casual, the kind of movement a man makes when he is so certain of his authority that he doesn't need to perform it. And the room rearranged itself around his will. 4 men moved to block the main doors. 4 more materialized from the transept, stepping out from behind marble columns like they had been waiting there all along, which, Kara realized, they had been. Dante didn't move. He stood in the side doorway with that impossible stillness, watching the men take their positions with the detached interest of someone observing weather patterns. His hand was still in his pocket. His posture hadn't shifted. If he was afraid, nothing in his body betrayed it. Kara had forgotten that about him, the way he could make stillness feel like a weapon. Marcus turned to the congregation with the smooth pivot of a man accustomed to managing rooms. His voice carried without effort, warm and reasonable and absolutely terrifying to anyone who knew how to listen. My apologies for the interruption. A small family matter has arisen that requires my attention. Please remain seated. The ceremony will resume shortly. Family matter. As if Dante Reyes were a distant cousin with a drinking problem. As if the last 7 years had been a scheduling conflict. The congregation settled uneasily. Some of them knew exactly what was happening. Some of them had been paid to be here. The rest, Kara's handful of actual friends, her brother's girlfriend, a few distant relatives who had come out of obligation, sat frozen in their pews, sensing that something was wrong without understanding what. Father Donnelly had gone pale. His hands trembled slightly against his prayer book. He had baptized Kara. He had buried her father. He had agreed to perform this ceremony because she had asked him to, because he trusted her, because he had no idea what kind of man she was marrying. She wanted to tell him to run. She wanted to tell everyone to run. But Dante was already moving, not toward the exits, toward the altar, toward her. Marcus's men tensed, hands moving toward waistbands, weight shifting forward. But Marcus raised that casual hand again, not yet. His smile hadn't wavered. He wanted this. Whatever was about to happen, he had planned for it. Dante walked up the center aisle with the unhurried pace of a man who had stopped fearing death sometime in the last 7 years. The congregation parted around him like water around stone. Kara watched him approach and felt something crack open in her chest. Grief and fury and something else she refused to name, all of it flooding the careful architecture she had built to contain it. He stopped 3 feet from the altar, close enough that she could see the details. The new scar along his jaw, thin and white and deliberate. The faint lines around his eyes that hadn't been there at 27. The way his shoulders held tension differently now, like a man who had learned to carry weight he couldn't put down. He smelled like cold October air, like the city outside, like something that had been gone a very long time and had only just remembered the way back. Kara. His voice was lower than she remembered. Rougher. A voice that had spent years not being used for softness. She didn't answer. She couldn't. If she opened her mouth, she didn't know what would come out. A scream, a sob, something that would shatter the composure she was barely maintaining. Dante glanced at Marcus, then at the men positioned around the nave, then back at her. When he spoke again, his voice was pitched low enough that only she could hear it beneath the ambient rustling of a restless congregation. I know what this looks like. I need you to trust me for the next 4 minutes. Trust him. 7 years. 7 years of waking up with his name still fading from her lips. 7 years of learning to sleep in the center of the bed because his side was too cold to touch. 7 years of building herself into someone who didn't need anyone. Not because she was strong, but because the alternative was unbearable. And he was asking her to trust him. Kara's voice came out steady. She had practiced steady for 8 months. She had gotten very good at it. You've been alive for 7 years. Not a question, an indictment, a blade if she could make it one. Dante absorbed it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He nodded once. Yes! Then you have 4 minutes to explain why. For a moment, something moved behind his eyes. Regret perhaps, or the ghost of it. Then the stillness returned, and when he spoke, his words were precise, each one carrying the weight of something long rehearsed. Marcus ordered the hit. The night at the warehouse, the ambush, it was his. I found out he was skimming from the harbor operation, funneling product into his own pipeline. He knew I was going to expose him. So he had me killed. The words landed like stones in still water. Kara felt them sink, felt the ripples spreading outward through everything she thought she knew. You survived, she said flatly. Barely. Pulled out of the harbor by someone I trusted. 3 months in a hospital outside Montreal before I could walk again. He paused. I wanted to come back, I wanted to find you. But you didn't. No, why? The question was a knife. She wanted it to cut him. She wanted him to feel even a fraction of what she had felt in the weeks after his funeral. The casket they wouldn't let her open. The grave she visited every Sunday for a year. The slow suffocation of learning to live without someone who had been the architecture of her entire future. Dante's voice dropped even lower. For the first time, something raw moved beneath the surface. Because Marcus was watching you. Because if I came back, you became a target. You became leverage. You became the one thing he could use to make me do whatever he wanted. His eyes held hers, dark, unflinching, carrying the weight of every choice he had made in those 7 years. So I stayed dead. I built a case. I connected with federal investigators. I spent 7 years constructing the architecture to take him apart legally, permanently, in a way that wouldn't touch you. Kara's hands tightened around her bouquet. The stems dug into her palms through the silk. And then you found out about the wedding. 3 weeks ago, one of my contacts flagged the marriage license. His jaw worked. I understood immediately. He knows I'm alive. He's known for months. This entire ceremony, the guest list, the venue, the timing, it's a trap. You're the anchor, the thing that guarantees I walk through those doors. Kara felt the truth of it settle into her bones. 8 months of planning. 8 months of Marcus's careful attentiveness, his patient courtship, his willingness to absorb her brother's debt in exchange for her hand. She had thought she understood the transaction. She had thought she was the one making the sacrifice. She was the bait. She had always been the bait. Behind them, Marcus cleared his throat, a subtle sound, a reminder that his patience was not infinite. Kara's mind moved fast now, faster than her grief, faster than her fury. She had spent 28 years learning to think in structures, load tolerances, stress fractures, the mathematics of what holds and what fails. This building had a weakness, every building did. There's a vestry door behind the altar, she said quietly. It exits to the parking structure, northeast stairwell. I mapped this building 8 months ago. Dante stared at her. For the first time since he had walked through that door, something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps. Recognition. The beginning of understanding that the woman in front of him was not the same woman he had left behind. Of course, he said. Kara turned. The vestry door was 15 feet away. Stone archway, iron hinges. Through it, a narrow corridor. Through that, the parking structure. Through that possibility, she started walking. Dante fell into step beside her. They made it 4 steps. Marcus's voice cut across the cathedral like a blade through silk. Not warm anymore, not performed. Raw and commanding and carrying the particular authority of a man who had stopped pretending. She stopped. She didn't want to stop. Every instinct screamed at her to keep moving, but her body obeyed before her mind could override it. 8 months of conditioning. 8 months of learning to respond when he spoke. She turned. Marcus stood at the altar, phone in hand. The screen faced outward. Even from this distance, Karas could see what it displayed. A live camera feed, a familiar kitchen, a familiar figure sitting at the table, hunched over a laptop, completely unaware. Sean, her brother, the reason she had agreed to any of this. And behind him, visible in the frame, two men who were not supposed to be there. Marcus tilted his head. The smile had returned. But it was different now, sharper, hungrier, carrying the weight of absolute leverage. "Stay," he said. Kara's hand went still in Dante's grip. She felt him register the change. The way her fingers stopped moving, the way her breath caught and held. The way her entire body oriented itself towards the small glowing screen in Marcus Callahan's hand like a compass needle finding north. Sean, sitting at his kitchen table, wearing the same faded Boston College sweatshirt he'd worn since sophomore year, hunched over his laptop with the particular posture of a man who had no idea that his life had become a bargaining chip in a cathedral 3 miles away. The two men behind him weren't hiding. They stood near the refrigerator with the casual ease of professionals, hands visible, postures relaxed, close enough to reach him in 2 steps if the order came. Marcus let the image speak for itself. 3 seconds. 5. Long enough for the mathematics to complete themselves in Kara's mind. Then Dante released her hand. She felt the loss of contact like a severed wire. He stepped back, not retreating, recalculating. His eyes moved from the phone to Marcus to the men positioned around the nave, processing variables, adjusting trajectories. She had seen him do this before, years ago in situations she had tried very hard to forget. He was looking for an angle, a weakness, a way to change the equation. He wasn't finding one. Kara. Marcus's voice was almost gentle now, the voice of a man who had won and could afford magnanimity. "Come here." She didn't move. "The men in your brother's apartment are very patient," Marcus continued. "They've been there since this morning, watching him sleep, watching him make coffee, watching him sit down to work on whatever freelance project he's convinced himself will finally turn his life around." He paused. "They'll keep watching, as long as I tell them to. Or they'll stop watching, if I tell them to do that instead." The congregation had gone completely silent. Even the ones who didn't understand the specifics understood the architecture of the moment. The bride frozen mid-escape, the groom holding a phone like a detonator, the resurrection in the charcoal suit standing 3 feet away with his hands empty and his options exhausted. Father Donnelly had pressed himself against the altar, prayer book clutched to his chest. His lips were moving. Kara wondered if he was praying for her or for himself. She took a breath, held it, let it out. Then she walked back toward the altar. Dante's voice was low and urgent behind her. "Kara, my brother walks free." She didn't turn around. Her voice carried across the nave with a clarity that surprised even her. Steady, architectural, leaving no room for negotiation. "Tonight, your men leave his apartment. He walks out of the city without being touched, without being followed, without ever knowing any of this happened." Marcus watched her approach with the patient interest of a man examining a chess move he hadn't anticipated. "And in exchange, I come with you." Willingly. No scene, no resistance. She stopped at the altar, close enough to see the faint lines around his eyes, the particular architecture of his cruelty. "The ceremony continues. We leave as husband and wife, and you get whatever it is you actually want from tonight." For a long moment Marcus said nothing. His eyes moved between Kara and Dante, measuring, calculating, enjoying the geometry of the situation he had constructed. "What I want," he said slowly, "is standing in my church wearing a suit he didn't pay for, pretending he has any power left to exercise." He smiled. "But your offer has merit. Your brother walks tonight, and you stay." Kara nodded once. "Then we have an arrangement." Behind her she heard Dante exhale, a controlled sound, tight with fury he couldn't afford to express. He understood what she was doing. She could feel his understanding like heat against her back. He knew she wasn't surrendering, she was buying time. The social club was 3 blocks from St. Brendan's, buried in a row of unremarkable buildings on a street that smelled like salt water and old brick. From the outside, it looked like nothing. A faded awning, a door that needed painting, the kind of place that tourists walked past without noticing. Inside was different. Dark wood paneling absorbed the October light filtering through narrow windows. Leather chairs arranged around tables that had witnessed 40 years of conversations that never happened. The smell of cigarette smoke so deeply embedded in the furniture that no amount of ventilation would ever fully remove it. This was the real architecture of Marcus Callahan's empire, not the glass towers downtown, not the legitimate businesses with their quarterly reports and their board meetings. But this room, with its low ceiling and its heavy silence and its absolute privacy. Kara sat in a leather chair near the window. She had refused to change out of her wedding dress, A small defiance, perhaps meaningless, but hers. The white silk pooled around her feet like something that had been discarded. Dante stood near the door, flanked by two of Marcus's men. They hadn't restrained him. They hadn't needed to. The mathematics of the situation were clear. He was here because Kara was here, and Kara was here because Sean was somewhere else, alive and unaware, and that chain of leverage was stronger than any physical restraint. Marcus poured himself a whiskey from a crystal decanter. The amber liquid caught the low light as he raised the glass, examining it with the attention of a man who appreciated fine things and had made a career of taking them from others. 7 years, he said, not looking at Dante. 7 years you've been out there, building your case, connecting your dots, playing the long game. He took a sip. I admire it, actually. The patience, the discipline. Most men would have come for me in the first year, would have tried something stupid and gotten themselves killed for real. Dante said nothing. But you waited, you planned, you built something. Marcus turned to face him finally, leaning against the edge of his desk. What was the endgame, Dante? Federal indictment? RICO charges? Did you imagine yourself testifying in open court, watching me get led away in handcuffs? Something like that. Romantic. Marcus smiled. Knave. But romantic. You always did have a sentimental streak. It's why you were never going to make it in this business. Too many principles. Too many lines you wouldn't cross. He gestured with his glass, a casual arc that encompassed the room, the building, the empire beyond. You know what I've built since you've been gone? Do you have any idea? I have some idea. No, you don't. Marcus set down his glass and began to walk. Slowly, deliberately, the circuit of a man displaying his kingdom. The harbor operation was just the beginning. Shipping, distribution, logistics, 37 legitimate businesses now. Restaurants, real estate, construction, all of them clean on paper, all of them feeding into the same infrastructure. He stopped in front of Dante, close enough to make the power differential explicit. 400 million in annual revenue. 60% legitimate, 40% not. And the 40%? He smiled. It's so deeply embedded in the 60% that you'd need an army of forensic accountants working for a decade to untangle it, and even then you'd need witnesses, physical evidence, someone willing to testify. Marcus glanced at Kara, then back at Dante. You don't have any of those things. You have theories, suspicions, circumstantial connections. Nothing that would survive a competent defense attorney for 15 minutes. Dante's expression hadn't changed throughout the entire monologue. That impossible stillness, that deliberate blankness that revealed nothing and absorbed everything. You're right, he said quietly. I don't have those things, Marcus satisfied. Which brings us to options. He returned to his desk, settling into the leather chair behind it with the ease of a man who had sat in that chair 1,000 times before. Option 1, you die tonight. Cleanly, quietly. Your body ends up in the harbor where it was supposed to end up 7 years ago. The federal contacts you've been cultivating receive anonymous tips that their source was unreliable. The case dies with you. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Option 2, you live, you come back into the fold. Those federal contacts, they become assets. You feed them what I want them to know. You become my window into their investigation, my early warning system. You work for me again, but this time, you understand exactly what the alternative looks like. Marcus smiled. Option 3 doesn't exist. Those are your choices. Dante was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 7 years of waiting. You should have made sure I was dead. I'm correcting that tonight. No, Dante's eyes never left Marcus's face. You must understand. I'm not talking about the tactical error. I'm talking about who I became because you didn't finish the job. What I learned, what I built, what I brought with me into this room. Something flickered in Marcus's expression, the first crack in the performance. Doubt, perhaps, or the beginning of it. You're in my building, surrounded by my men, with nothing but the clothes you're wearing and whatever delusions you've been nursing for 7 years. He leaned forward. What exactly did you bring? Dante smiled. It was not a warm expression. Ask her. Both men turned to look at Kara. She had been quiet for 20 minutes, sitting in her leather chair near the window, white dress pooled around her feet, hands folded in her lap, watching, listening, processing every word that came out of Marshmus Callahan's mouth with the attention of a woman who had spent her entire adult life learning to read between numbers. Her phone sat on the small table beside her chair. She had been holding it when they arrived. No one had thought to take it from her. Why would they? She was the leverage. She was the bride. She was the thing they were using to control Dante. She was not a threat. Marcus's brow furrowed slightly. Kara, what is he talking about? Kara picked up her phone, turned it over in her hands. set it face down on the table with the particular deliberateness of a woman who had just completed something irreversible. 8 months ago, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room, you handed me your financial disclosure documents, part of the marriage contract. Legal requirement for combined assets, 47 pages of account structures, holding companies, trust arrangements, and property portfolios. Marcus's expression shifted, not quite alarm, not yet, but the beginning of attention. I'm a forensic accountant, Marcus. Kara looked up at him, and something in her eyes had changed. The softness replaced by something angular and precise. Did you think I didn't read them? The room went very still. I read every page. I photographed every page. And then I spent the next 8 months cross-referencing those account structures against public business filings. SEC documents, property records, corporate registrations. She tilted her head slightly. Your 40% isn't as invisible as you think it is. The layering is sophisticated, but it has patterns, signatures, points where the clean money and the dirty money touch each other in ways that leave marks. Marcus's hand had tightened around his whiskey glass. His knuckles were white. You're bluffing. I don't bluff. Kara stood. The white dress moved around her like a surrender flag, but nothing in her posture suggested surrender. I calculate, I document, and then I wait for the right moment to deploy what I've built. She gestured toward her phone. That moment was about 15 minutes ago. While you were walking Dante through the architecture of your empire, I was sending the complete documented evidence package to a federal investigator. Not Dante's contact, mine. Someone I've been corresponding with for 3 months. Someone who's been waiting for exactly this kind of gift. The door to the room opened. One of Marcus's men leaned in, murmuring something urgent in his ear. Marcus listened. His face went through several transformations in rapid sequence. Confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like admiration, and finally settling on cold, absolute fury. He looked at Kara, then at the phone on the table, then back at her. What did you do? Kara's voice was steady, the voice of a woman who had spent 8 months building something in the dark, waiting for exactly this moment. I survived you, Marcus, that's what I did. I walked into your trap with my eyes open, and I built a bigger one around it. The room had gone very, very still. Marcus's phone began to ring, then one of his men's phones, then another. A cascade of alerts, a network responding to something that was already in motion, already beyond anyone's ability to contain. Kara looked at Dante. He was watching her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not surprise exactly, but something deeper. Recognition. The understanding that the woman standing in front of him, in a white wedding dress, had spent 7 years becoming someone he hadn't anticipated. Someone who didn't need to be rescued. Someone who had rescued herself. The phones kept ringing. Marcus stood behind his desk with the stillness of a man watching his empire develop fractures in real time. His knuckles had gone white around the crystal glass. The whiskey inside trembled slightly, the only visible sign that anything had shifted in the architecture of his control. His men were moving now, murmured conversations, urgent glances toward the door. The particular energy of professionals recognizing that the situation had changed, in ways they hadn't been briefed for. Kara watched it all with the detached precision of an engineer observing a stress test. She had calculated this moment for 3 months, had run the scenarios in her head during sleepless nights, had wondered, more than once, if she would have the nerve to actually deploy what she had built. Turns out she did. The financial disclosures you gave me, she said, her voice cutting through the ambient chaos, contained 17 points of connection between your legitimate holdings and offshore accounts that don't appear in any public filing. The layering was good, sophisticated, but you made a mistake. Marcus's jaw tightened. I don't make mistakes. You made one. Kara stepped forward, the white silk of her dress dragging across the hardwood floor like a ghost following her movements. You assumed I was what you saw. A woman settling her brother's debt, a transaction in Tool. Someone who would sign the documents without reading them, walk down the aisle without questioning why, become Mrs. Callahan without ever understanding what that name actually meant. She stopped 3 feet from his desk, close enough to see the vein pulsing in his temple, close enough to see the expensive cologne that had once made her feel safe and now made her feel nothing at all. I am a forensic accountant, Marcus. I have been reading documents since I was 19 years old. I notice things, patterns, inconsistencies. The way a number doesn't quite fit the shape of the box it's supposed to occupy. Her voice dropped slightly. I noticed everything about you, from the very beginning. One of Marcus's men, Connolly, the thick-necked best man, appeared in the doorway. His face was pale. Sir, We've got federal vehicles at the harbor, the construction site on Dorchester, is the restaurant on. I know. Marcus's voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man holding something together through sheer force of will. Get everyone out. Standard protocol. Move. Connolly disappeared. More footsteps in the hallway. More doors opening and closing. The building was emptying around them. Marcus's network scattering like roaches when the lights came on. But Marcus himself didn't move. He was looking at Kara with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not the performed warmth, not the calculated charm, not the cold authority he deployed when he wanted to remind someone of their place. This was something rawer, something that had been buried beneath years of careful construction, hatred, pure and architectural. The hatred of a man who had been outmaneuvered by someone he had categorized as furniture. You think this changes anything? His voice was quiet now. Dangerously quiet. You think sending files to some federal contact means I'm finished? I have lawyers. I have accountants. I have people in places you can't even imagine. This will take years to untangle, if it ever gets untangled at all. Maybe. Kara didn't flinch. But you won't be untangling it from this building. You won't be untangling it while you're running your network, attending your board meetings, living your life. You'll be untangling it from inside a federal investigation that has your name at the very top. And every minute you spend fighting that investigation is a minute you're not building, not expanding, not winning. She tilted her head slightly. I don't need to destroy you, Marcus. I just need to slow you down long enough for you to destroy yourself. Men like you, men who need to keep moving forward to survive. You can't handle standing still. It eats you from the inside. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. The hatred was still there, but something else moved beneath it now. Recognition, perhaps. The understanding that he had fundamentally miscalculated the woman standing in front of him. You've been planning this since the beginning. Not a question. Since the second month. Kara's voice was too steady. Since I realized what you actually were. Since I understood that marrying you wasn't going to settle my brother's debt. It was going to make me complicit in everything you'd built. I was going to be the signature on documents I didn't understand. The face at charity events for organizations that laundered your money. The wife who knew nothing and was therefore responsible for everything. She took a breath. Let it out. I couldn't fight you directly. I didn't have the resources, the connections, the power. But I had time and I had access. And I had a skill set that you were too arrogant to consider a threat. Her voice dropped to something almost gentle. You handed me the weapon. Marcus, all I had to do was learn how to use it. The room had gone quiet. Marcus's men had disappeared. The phones had stopped ringing. Or perhaps they had just given up. The building felt hollow now, emptied of everything except the three people standing in the low light of Marcus Callahan's private office. Marcus set down his whiskey glass. The sound was very small in the silence. Then he moved not toward the door, not toward escape. Toward Kara, 2 steps, 3. Fast enough that she didn't have time to retreat. His hand closed around her arm, not gently. Not the way he had touched her during their 8 months of careful courtship. This was the grip of a man who had stopped pretending. You think you've won. His voice was barely a whisper, his face was inches from hers. You think you've beaten me, but you're still in my building. Still wearing my ring, still. He didn't finish the sentence. Dante moved. Kara had forgotten how fast he could be when he stopped being still. One moment he was standing near the door, hands empty, posture relaxed. The next moment he was between her and Marcus was on the floor, and something had happened in the space between those two states that her eyes couldn't quite track. It wasn't a fight. There was no struggle, no exchange of blows, no dramatic confrontation. It was architecture, precise, load-bearing, designed to accomplish a specific structural goal. Marcus on the ground, Marcus's arm bent at an angle that suggested it would break if he moved. Marcus's face pressed against the hardwood floor he had walked across 1,000 times as the master of this building. Dante's voice was very quiet. I have been waiting 7 years for this moment. Marcus tried to speak. Dante applied pressure. Marcus stopped trying. I imagined it different ways. Sometimes I imagined killing you. Sometimes I imagined watching you get arrested. Sometimes I imagined taking everything you had built, piece by piece, until you were standing in the ruins of your own empire wondering where it all went wrong. Dante leaned closer. His voice dropped even further, intimate, almost gentle, carrying the weight of every sleepless night, every hospital room, every moment of the last 7 years. But this is better, watching her take you apart. Watching you realize that you lost to someone you never even saw as a threat. He paused. That's going to stay with you. For the rest of your life. Every time you close your eyes, you're going to remember this moment. The moment you understood that you were never as smart as you thought you were. He released Marcus's arm and stepped back. The movement was controlled, deliberate, carrying no excess motion. Marcus didn't get up immediately. He lay on the floor for a long moment, breathing hard, staring at the wood grain inches from his face. When he finally pushed himself to his knees, something had changed in his expression. The hatred was still there, but beneath it was something else. Fear. The fear of a man who had just discovered that the world contained variables he couldn't calculate. The door to the office opened. 3 men in federal windbreakers entered, followed by a woman in a gray suit, who carried herself with the particular authority of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this exact moment. Marcus Callahan. Her voice was flat, professional, carrying no satisfaction. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, racketeering, and 12 other charges that will be explained to you in detail during processing. She looked at Kara. A brief nod. Recognition, acknowledgement, gratitude, then back to Marcus. Get him up. The street outside the social club smelled like salt water in October cold. Kara stood on the sidewalk and watched the federal vehicles multiply. Black SUVs, unmarked sedans, the particular choreography of an operation that had been waiting for authorization. 2 blocks north, she could see more activity. More vehicles. More men in windbreakers moving with purpose. The network was being dismantled in real time. Every location she had mapped. Every connection she had documented. Every piece of the empire Marcus Callahan had built over 2 decades. Being catalogued and processed and prepared for the long legal battle ahead. It would take years, she knew that. Lawyers and appeals and procedural delays. Men like Marcus didn't go quietly. They fought with every resource they had, every contact they could leverage, every loophole they could exploit. But he would be fighting from inside an investigation now. From inside a system that had his name at the top of a very long list. From inside a cage of his own construction, built from the documents he had so carelessly handed to the woman he thought was just a transaction. Kara's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Sean. Calling from his apartment, she answered, "Hey, Kara?" Her brother's voice was confused, slightly worried. "I just got the weirdest call from some guy who said he was a friend of yours. Said I should check in. Is everything okay?" Kara closed her eyes. Felt the October air on her face. Felt the weight of the last 8 months begin, slowly, tentatively to lift. "Everything's fine, Sean. I promise. I'll explain later, okay? Just stay home tonight, order some food, watch a movie." "Are you sure?" "You sound weird." "I'm sure." She paused. "I love you. You know that, right?" It's a beat of silence. Then, "Yeah, I know, I love you too." Another pause. "Kara, are you crying?" "No." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I'll call you tomorrow." She hung up. The federal vehicles were pulling away now, one by one, taking Marcus Callahan and his network and his empire to be processed, catalogued, entered into a system that would chew on him for years. Taking the last 8 months of Kara's life and rendering them meaningful. She had survived. Not just the trap, but the transaction. Not just Marcus, but the version of herself that had been willing to accept the transaction as the only option. She had built something in the dark, and it had worked. Footsteps behind her. She didn't turn. Dante came to stand beside her on the sidewalk, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence, but not touching. Not yet. The distance between them was measured in more than feet. It was measured in years, in grief, in all the things that had happened while he was dead, and she was learning to live without him. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the vehicles, watching the activity, watching the architecture of Marcus Callahan's world come apart piece by piece. Finally, Dante spoke. "You didn't need me." Kara considered this. "No, you had the whole thing planned. The evidence, the contact, the timing. If I hadn't walked into that cathedral, you would have found another way to deploy it." Kara nodded. "The wedding itself was a deadline. I was going to wait until after the ceremony, use my position as his wife to gather more evidence, build an even stronger case. Your arrival accelerated things, but it didn't change the fundamental architecture." Dante was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I came to save you, I know, but you didn't need saving, no." Kara turned to look at him for the first time, his profile in the streetlight. The scar she didn't recognize. The years she hadn't witnessed carved into the lines around his eyes. "But you came anyway. Even though you knew it was a trap. Even though you knew Marcus was waiting for you. Even though walking through those doors meant risking everything you'd built over 7 years." Dante's jaw tightened. "I couldn't let him have you. That's not why you came." He turned to face her. The stillness was still there, that impossible composure that had always made him feel like something carved from stone. But beneath it, something moved. Something that looked almost like vulnerability. "I came because I found out he had you." His voice was rough, honest in a way that cost him something. Everything else, the case, the timing, the federal contacts, that was the reason I let myself come. The justification I constructed to make it okay to walk back into your life after 7 years of silence. Let it out. But you were why, you were always why. From the moment I woke up in that hospital in Montreal with 3 bullets in my chest and your name on my lips, every single thing I did was about finding my way back to you. I told myself it wasn't. I told myself I was being strategic, disciplined, that I was protecting you by staying away. His voice dropped. I was lying, was afraid. Afraid that I'd come back and you'd have moved on. Afraid that I'd waited too long and lost you forever. Afraid that the woman I loved had become someone who didn't need me anymore. He gestured at the federal vehicles, at the social club, at the wreckage of Marcus Callahan's empire. And then I walked into that cathedral, and I watched you take apart the most dangerous man in South Boston with nothing but your phone and 8 months of preparation. And I realized, he stopped, swallowed. I realized you didn't need me. You never did, you just wanted me. And I threw that away because I was too afraid to come home. Kara felt something shift in her chest. The wall she had built. The architecture of her grief. The careful structure that had allowed her to survive the last 7 years without him. She felt it begin to crack. You have a lot of ground to make up, Dante Reyes. His eyes met hers, dark and steady and carrying the weight of everything he had done and failed to do. I know. 7 years. 312 Sundays I spent at your grave talking to a headstone, telling you about my week. 8 months of letting Marcus Callahan touch me because I thought you were dead and nothing mattered anymore. Dante flinched, absorbed it. Didn't look away. I know, you can't fix that. You can't apologize for that. There's no gesture grand enough, no words pretty enough, to undo what you did by staying away. Kara looked at him for a long moment. The streetlight caught his face, the scar along his jaw, the gray at his temples that hadn't been there 7 years ago, the lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights in hospital rooms and years of carrying a weight he could never put down. He had aged. They both had. They were not the people they had been at 20 and 27, young and certain and convinced that love was enough to survive anything. They were harder now, sharper, carved by the things that had happened to them, but still here, both of them, standing on a South Boston sidewalk in the aftermath of something that should have destroyed them. I'm not going to forgive you, Kara said quietly. Not tonight, maybe not for a long time. Dante nodded. I understand, but I'm going to start walking. And if you want to walk in the same direction. She let the sentence hang unfinished. She turned, began to move down the sidewalk, away from the social club, away from the federal vehicles, away from the cathedral where she was supposed to become someone else's wife. Behind her, she heard footsteps. She didn't slow down, she didn't look back, but she felt him fall into step beside her, matching her pace, keeping her distance. Not reaching for her hand, not yet, not until she was ready, but present. There they walked in silence through the South Boston night, past darkened storefronts and parked cars and streetlights that cast pools of amber on the wet asphalt. The harbor was somewhere ahead of them, invisible in the darkness, filling the air with the smells of salt and cold water. Kara didn't know where they were going. She didn't know what came next. The case against Marcus would take years. Her brother would have questions she wasn't sure how to answer. Her life, the careful architecture of work and routine and survival she had built in Dante's absence, would have to be reconstructed around the fact of his presence. Everything was uncertain, everything was unresolved, but she was walking, and he was walking beside her. And somewhere in the space between them, not closed, not healed, but present, was the possibility of something. A future neither of them could see yet. A structure waiting to be built. The last image. Kara Donovan walking through the October night in a white wedding dress, Dante Reyes's jacket draped across her shoulders at some point neither of them had consciously marked. The harbor ahead, the city around them, the weight of 7 years between them, heavy and real and, for the first time, something they would carry together, not forgiven, not forgotten, but moving forward. If you enjoy this story, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and even more intriguing, interesting dark romance stories. Remember to comment where you're watching from. See you in the next one.